It's a real honour to be invited to be part of the Icon series. And I think what's such an amazing opportunity about it is that it gives you some space and some time and quite a big project with the exhibition and the book to reflect back on a career of making, even right back to childhood, and try and look at those connections between the things that you make over those years, and also what's influenced you, what's kind of been important to you. So when I put this talk together, I do have a little bit more historical stuff than I would usually do, and I think that's because some of those connections are kind of become more important again and new to me. I feel real privileged to be on this country, and I really want to thank the traditional custodians of the land who have shared this country with me in the spirit of Nyapati Nyapati, respect and reciprocal relationships, and whose country for me really continues to inspire. And some of those peoples are the Gawler Ranges Aboriginal Corporation, who are the custodians of the Lake Ghana area, which I travel to quite a bit, the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains, the Ngarrindjeri people of the Lower Murray and Coorong, and the Arabana people of Katitunda Lake Eyre. So over the years, my work has varied, but a core theme of my work is space and light. And one of the best places to experience light is this incredible minimal landscapes of the salt lakes of South Australia, where all the elements are so reduced that, like here in Katitunda, light becomes landscape. So for me, my work really is not about place, but rather it's about space. It's so easy when people say, "What's your work about?" to reference landscape. But my work really is not about landscape. It's about light, space, and distance. And when I'm travelling and walking around, I still feel so ignorant of this land, so little knowledge of the plants, the soils, the stories and the histories. And it's ridiculous sometimes when we go hiking off track that we carry this incredible heavy packs because we have no idea how to live off the land itself, and water as well. So I don't really feel like I'm in the land when I'm there. Often I just feel like I'm slightly hovering above it. So I see these spaces as almost abstract landscapes, looking at distance. Is this distance a real space, or is it a function of our vision? For as we move towards it, it moves away from us. And in a lot of my work, I'm trying to question what I'm actually seeing. The world is blue at its edges and at its depth. Blue is a colour of distance. It is the colour of light that is lost, because the blue end of the spectrum does not travel the whole distance from the sun to us. It gets dispersed amongst the molecules of the air. But the blue, the colour of distance, is also the colour of an emotion, of solitude, of desire, of there seen from here, and the colour of where you are not. And this is the colour of where you can never go. This is a quote from Rebecca Solnit, who continues to inspire me about looking at distance and how we feel about it. So this quote has influenced a series of blue works that I've been doing recently, such as this piece, Pale Blue Dot. It has a very kind of universal shape, and it's blue at its edges. So that concentration about the edge, it could be something quite small or something really large. It is made with an opaline glass, and opaline glass splits light into warm and cool tones. It transmits the warm spectrum of light, so if light's shining through it, it's like a warmer colour, but reflects the cool spectrum of light. So in this piece, there's an opaque black behind it, so there's no light able to travel through, which makes the piece blue. So in these pieces, such as this piece, Suspended Hue, they're blue, but they're not made out of blue glass. So I like playing with that kind of questioning of perception. These pieces, halites, takes its form from a salt crystal. The shape, they are actually all made from exactly the same glass, which is cut up sheet glass, opaline glass, cut up into many layers to form that shape. And the only difference between the glass is time. So the opaline glass comes in clear. It's a clear sheet glass. It's what we call a striking glass. And it opacifies, meaning becoming more and more opaque with heat and time. So from the whitish one to the dark, the difference is around 30 minutes of heat in the kiln and 10 degrees hotter. So I like how some of these pieces reflect, both perception but also time. This is one piece called Waning Crescents, shown in different light, and it's quite thick around the edges. It's showing in the gallery at the moment. And if you look carefully, you can see a warm shadow where the light just passes just through the opaline glass because of its thickness. And there you can see that evidence of light splitting. And in this series, Receptor for Light, also made out of opaline, we see those warmer, cool tones. So as a maker, I see my material as glass and light. And I use glass to hold light, to reflect light, to scatter light, and to refract light. And what I love about this opaline glass is it actually acts in a very similar way to light in the sky. And the effect of the scattering of light in the glass is referred to the Tyndall effect, where the longer light waves, such as the blue lights, are more transmitted. And this piece, called Receptor for Light, this is one of the first in the series, there's mainly kind of front light on it. And while the shorter wavelengths diffuse light, so when light's coming through the piece, you can see those kind of warmer tones and that refraction on the base. So my work kind of touches on perception, and I like questioning what we're seeing, and also kind of demanding the viewer to be tuned into subtlety. I'm really kind of attracted to whites, but there's no such thing as pure white. It only exists in the mind. And so a piece that might first just appear white, slowly, with time, changes to reveal different colours. So another work that's also in the exhibition showing different light direction change. Some of this is caused by the change of light, but also, for me, more importantly, the tuning of the eye of the person who is viewing the work. And I really like playing with this activation of the viewer. And here you see that light with that piece, the two different opaline pieces, almost looking the same colour. The focal point at the front there, and receptor of light in the back. So I said I was going to go back, and I've never shown early shots before. Looking at my childhood and realising my father as an architect was a big influence on me as a maker now. And he always spoke as a child about the importance of light in the buildings, directional, that relationship to letting the outside in. And he included me in lots of product launches, such as Alessi product launches or designer Saturdays. As my mother wouldn't go, I ended up being his handbag, which I most enjoyed. also appreciating, and this is our childhood home renovation at the top of a tiny little house in Carlton, where he made a lantern by lifting the roof up and just putting all those windows around. And there was a Japanese influence as well in our household, so that was my parents' bed on the tatami mats. And as kids, this is my sister here, we used to jump off the top and off the balcony onto a little bed below. But it kind of shows that appreciation of kind of light, bringing light into those tiny little terrace houses in Melbourne. But also appreciating objects, and we had a Richard Sapper Lessie kettle, William Wagonfield's glass teacups, and realising quite early on that we create our own surroundings around us by the things that we both make or create in our houses. And how important objects are to be more than just their utilitarian value, that they give us poetry in our life. They have the potential to give us poetry. And so that relationship that we have with objects and using them, whether it just be your teacup or whether it be your breakfast bowl you eat, and that those kind of things have that potential to enrich our lives. And I think also that subconscious communication we have with objects around us. In the middle there is a lithograph by Lawrence Dawes, and that picture called The Beach of the horizon line used to sit leaned up against our kitchen table the whole childhood growing up. And I didn't even recognise the link until I left for Canberra and then came back to my family house. So I was very keen to go to RMIT and be an industrial designer because I like that idea of objects and design and utility. But the thing that was missing for me was a relationship with material, and that relationship with your hands on the material and that deep understanding. So instead I went to Canberra School of Art under Stephen Proctor. The education there was a 4-year degree, and with minimal students. We had 5 students there with a lot of access to material and to the workshop at 10 p.m. at night. And that importance of making and understanding technique and time with the material was a focus there. I think partly influenced by the importance of craft, and the school was set up in the tradition of the Bauhaus. And this was very influential for me, having this concentration on understanding, as Stephen Proctor would say, finding the essence in the material. He used to say, I'm not interested in effects, I'm interested in quality. And his work here, The Seeds of Light, his work, he was coming from the European tradition of glass cutting, and his work here, you can see that influence of using glass to hold light. One focus of the program I went through is that we had to write a work proposal, which meant that you had to understand what you were on about. So it was an early kind of almost self-directed study. And at that stage, straight out of school, I found it initially quite difficult. But then one day we were travelling across the Hay Plains, and I realised that I had an emotive connection to the space of this landscape. And there was something in that connection that I felt that I needed to investigate, and that had links with other things that I liked. And really, since that time in second year art school, I've been really working on the same idea and trying to understand what it is about this, this emotive kind of feeling I get. And I see every series of work I make really a different sentence in the conversation of exploring that. So around that time I was still very interested in the vessel. I mean, the thing about working in vessels is you have close relationships too. They're not like paintings where you stand back. You can feel them more, you can touch them more. I was working on the horizon line and making work that was very representational, really. There's a text in there which is engraved and fused in the glass that is representing my internal space, the person in the landscape, and then the horizontal line. So I start off with sheet glass, cut up the sheet glass to mix the different colours together. I engrave the text and then enamel it, and then layer up the glass and fuse it in the kiln. The glass is then wheel worked with old spatula lathe with stone and diamond wheels to kind of create that texture on the surface. And those kind of textures enable kind of the viewer to be drawn in to the work. They're not shiny and reflective. And I think would have been straight after school, Giles Bettison and myself, I think, imported the first 3 spatula lathes into South Australia, one going to the University of South Australia and one each for ourselves, from an old factory in Austria that was shutting down. So with these vessel works, dealing with space, it was almost with the shape. The space around the vessel was more important for me than the shape of the vessel itself. So by 4th year, which is around 1997, because in our way that we had to focus on creating work, a body of work that was about what we were on about, I found it a relatively easy transition then to go from art school to becoming a full-time artist. I was really lucky to have a very successful start where I won the Run-Amok Prize, which meant that I instantly could be known outside the school situation, and even more importantly offered a residency at Bullseye Glass in Portland, Oregon. Bullseye Glass is the factory that manufactures the glass that I use for my work. This is Klaus Moyer, who started the Canberra School of Art Glass Department, who is a big advocate for a lot of us working in glass and supporter in terms of making connections for us to work internationally. It was an incredible experience going on that residency. One, because it would have been not even 6 months before, I spent the summer holidays painting my parents' house to buy 5 sheets of glass to finish my work. And then we got into this situation and we could use as much glass as we wanted to create work, which was amazing and also overwhelming. What was also important with my relationship with Bullseye Glass is they ended up representing my work and taking my work to an important art fair, so for Chicago, for most of my career really. And what was great about that art fair is that a lot of other people see your work. I think at that time, why my work stood out is that my work was really quiet. It was very muted tones, it wasn't shiny, and it wasn't loud. So in such a big environment with so much craft and sculpture and glass around, and this quietness ended up having quite a presence. Lani said she was attracted to my work because it did not look like their glass, which at the time really I only produced a lot of bright colours. So I was able to then work in Europe as well by my work being picked up after being seen at SOFA Chicago. So moved back after my time in Canberra to Adelaide to join the Blue Pony studio that had just started. and the year before with Claire Belfrage, Deb Jones, Jane Cowie, Matt Larwood and Gabriella Bozzetto. So I'd moved to Adelaide. It was an absolutely fabulous place to make work, but I was in the glassblowers town. And my work is kiln forming, so I didn't go to the JamFactory. For me, a studio space is so important. One was to be able to set up some of my own equipment, one bit at a time. I spent the runner prize money buying the kiln, and then I spent the next 2 pieces of work that I sold, then buying the lathe. But also, this is your creative space. It is a place to leave work out, to look and to observe. And I was just saying a second ago that for me, the best place to see my work is in my studio, because that's where I make all the decisions. That's the lighting environment in which I'm deciding in which direction the work to go. In 2006, 2007, Deb Jones and I bought a building to create Gate 8 Workshop. And what this was almost a derelict building. And what this allowed was the chance to firstly set up our infrastructure in terms of a cold shop, kilns, all the 3-phase electricity, without that pressure in terms of a rental space, with being able to move. So if we needed to move, it was going to be on our own terms. The other thing that we wanted to do was also have a group studio that was more than just glass, so more multimedia, so there can be a cross-dialogue between different artists working there. And so here we've got Christine, Rachel Harris, Katrina Freen, myself, Lauren Simeone, a jeweller, and Deb Jones. And that dialogue, I think, between artists is something for me that is important, but also within a kind of group studio situation as well, having enough time also in the studio on your own. There's a few, so I've always worked in a group. There's a few rules that I think are really great and important in terms of a group studio, and one is to respect each other and each other's work, and to respect the studio. And those 2 principles, I think, are the heart of keeping things going and well. So around 2002, I moved away from the vessel to abstraction. And so rather than that representational work going, this is the horizon line, this is the person, this is the mindscape within the land, that I just wanted to present stillness. And this is a slumped, folded piece of hanging glass with glass behind it. That's almost the feeling of stillness felt standing in a large space. For me, often I am in the studio on my own, going on my own trajectory, having no idea, almost feels like you're kind of talking to yourself with your own kind of vision. And there's a lot of struggles, I think, being an artist, but sometimes there is a win. And this is a piece that won the Tom Malone Prize around 2002. But the bigger win for me here was the communication and the understanding of my work. They decided to hang my work next to a Western Australian artist called Brian Blanchflower, without my knowledge. And he's an artist that I looked at throughout my studies when I was still at Canberra, and he said, the further you go out there, the further you go into yourself. And so that idea as an artist to communicate and to be understood, to do that communication that is without words, was for me a career highlight. So I see my work as places for contemplation. I am trying to find the quiet space within the viewer to become aware of their own mind, the thoughts and mind space. These are a glass that's actually laser cut, float glass and slumped, in front of glass behind, which is fused and enamelled. Agnes Martin has always, writing has always been an influence throughout my whole career. And she talks a lot about beauty, and beauty is the mystery of life. But beauty is in the mind, not in the eye. And that's incredible to say as an artist, but something I really understand. I'm trying to communicate something with eyes, with vision, but is something that I'm actually trying to access more of the mind. So I moved to work finding again the horizontal line, and these are fused glass pieces again. This is from around 2006, where there wasn't a whole lot of different white glasses and bullseye, so I'm trying to actually layer up glass to find different tonal values within the glass, and lots of little strips that let the glass from behind seep through those gaps in the strip to kind of create this depth, if you look closely, which you'll have to look next door, not in the slides, to create depth within 9mm. And what I like about these pieces, the horizontal line, particularly more visible in the last one, is the eye goes to the gap between the pieces. These pieces are made out of the top panel and the bottom panel, and the focal point is the gap between them, which is nothing. It's an illusion. It's not where the glass is. And at this time, as a glass, I was working very opaquely, and what is beautiful about glass is its ability to hold light. So I developed these box forms which pulled the glass off the wall to almost create freestanding paintings. So I could now work with two sides, the front and the back, and the light in between. So as you walk towards these pieces, and there's two pieces in the exhibition, the lines actually move just because of proximity. I think often I'm playing around in my work with directing the viewer, how they interact with the work. So then I broke out of the box form to want to just express light coming out of an area, such as this piece Into the Blue, which is kind of top parts are fused, cast, fused and glued. I thought I'd just quickly take you through the making of some of these, one of the box pieces. So I'm a kiln former, so I'm starting with sheet glass, and then I layer up I need to make 5 sides of a box. So I layer up the glass with 3 different layers in glass, and in this case frit, which is the second image, and make one side of the box. The third image is like a cast section, which is at the bottom of the box. I fuse a wedge of glass and cast another wedge of glass of a different colour, and then fuse them together. So to make these pieces is really complicated because glass likes to be round. They're neither cast nor fused. So with these pieces, I don't have a mould around the outside, I have an internal mould. Moulds like to gas, which is really tricky, and gas will come straight through the surface of the glass. So these moulds are made with holes all the way inside them so the gas can kind of come out, and you can see them with the straws there. And then they're fired in such a way that they're monitored with a thermocouple, so that I really know in pre-firing the moulds that there's no moisture inside the mould. The mould then gets wrapped around with the 5 sheets of glass that I have in the second photo, and then the mould comes out. So these pieces are actually, this is a setup in the kiln. So I have a panel on the bottom, the internal mould on the inside, which is completely surrounded by glass. That's why it's got such an issue with gassing. And then bricks around the outside. And then I have 5 different thermocouples. And that means that I can monitor not the temperature of the kiln, but closer the temperature of the piece. So I have a much deeper understanding of exactly what's happening in terms of heat and glass in the kiln. And annealing glass, which is the cooling of glass, that initial annealing phase, the glass can't be any more than 5 degrees difference between itself in different areas of the glass. When you have a big cast section, which is a heat sink, and then very and thinner sections, getting that differential the same takes an incredible long time. So this piece, because of the silly shape that I decided to make, took 5 days to cool down into the kiln without cracking. There's also a little bit of shape-induced stress because of the glass likes to be round, not into a box. And then the cold working surface, first with the machine and then with the hand. And the hand grinding process for me is an important part of my creative process. It's really quite meditative. It takes a long time and you use a circular movement. And finding inspiration as an artist is something we all have to know how we do. I can't say I want to be inspired. I have to do activities or create a space so inspiration happens. For me, that is walking, it is running, it is being in nature, but it is also hand grinding as well. And this is the box form of a similar piece to the piece that was in the kiln. And you can see the frit in that making the bubbles. And what I like about frit is the more air you introduce into the glass, the more opaque it becomes. So it then again references that idea of invisibility. Those pieces are highly technical. The works happening at the time, even the fused glass wall piece, were very exacting, very contrived. And looking into nature, you see this incredible tension between this chaos, this randomness, and this control. And that's not something I was getting in my work. In terms of developing different series, it's important to do a continuous kind of research and awareness, I suppose, of being searching for ideas. So I see that as kind of inputs. So that's continuously looking for inspiration, but always looking for inspiration, whether it's music, art, writing, experiences or place, but looking for that inspiration that relates to the thing that you are searching for particularly. I almost see this as creating a library. And then playing with outputs. So outputs is finding qualities in materials, such as playing with paper or light, and different kind of qualities that you're trying to find that might do something, but also playing around with the material of glass. And so here, looking back for these fused powder works, I was playing around with the powder from bullseye glass and never quite finding that quality. So this is years before this work happens, but then really enjoying the glass powder from the grinding process, as you can see at the bowl in the second picture. And then going, well, maybe I can fuse that glass powder onto glass. And then that's the last picture, is finding a type of glass that I could grind up and successfully get the kind of qualities that I was after. And sometimes one test can provide a whole series of works. So these works start off with sandblasted float glass, which I was also interested in seeing if I could use float glass in my practice rather than importing bullseye glass, which is very expensive and also from overseas. Starting off with a sandblasted float glass and then grinding up glass into a really fine powder, almost like a milk kind of slurry, which is it is a bullseye glass, but it's very opaque. It's a lead glass, very soft glass. And then moving the powder across that surface of the glass using water as my brush. And then letting that water evaporate, and once the water evaporated, firing it in the kiln. This process, totally different from the other process, reminded me of what I see as a formal art training in suiboku, which is a Japanese ink brush painting, which I used to do in Mangalith Studios in Carlton, while my mother, who was a dance teacher, taught upstairs in the dance class. And so that idea in Japanese painting is finding that tension between beauty and order. Finding when doing that first brush stroke, you are letting the ink swell in the rice paper while having, so it expressing the material while having that control of the maker. It's quite a quick process, but it's also accessing like a meditative process, because we had to mix the ink for 20 minutes before we made that first brush stroke. This early training, and I started when I was 6, then went to about 15, is I see as my formal art training. And that's probably why I see tonally, because we were never allowed to use colour except for in flowers. So this work is quite a fast process, and it's random and it's uncontrolled, which those of you who know me also know that I find that most challenging. So the connections I make with this work often come after. And what I love about this work, working with water and residue, it reminds me of those, the Northern Australia, where water is so potent. The memory of water is so potent, and the land is full of drainage lines and evaporation lines. And you're aware of time because you're aware of the absence, you're aware of when the water comes, how far it travels. From northern Queensland, where the evaporation rate is 2 millimetres, and yet the rain, 2 metres, sorry, and the rainfall is only 2 millimetres. So that becoming cycle of water with visible, invisible, when it evaporates, visible again as cloud. And so those kind of cycles and invisibility relates to that work. But also this work called Unseen, where I'm playing with invisibility. I'm playing around with the act of seeing and the physicality of the eye focusing on an indefinable space, which I'm doing with a real, in this case, a combination of glass and artificial light. So creating that indefinable surface. So you can, hopefully, when you're looking at the work, you can feel your eye actually in the act of trying to focus. And I like that blurred line between what's in here and what's out there in the landscape, in what you're seeing and how we perceive it. Glass and light movement in the States has been a strong influence. Helen Pashkin, James Turrell, Robert Irwin and Mary Case, space light artists, because they are about perception. James Turrell said, I'm more interested in your seeing as a viewer than my seeing. And Robert Irwin, whose piece this is, says seeing is forgetting the actual name of what we're seeing. And just a quick story. I was reminded of that when my father had an aneurysm and he was in hospital, and he used to look out at the window, and he said to me once he used to watch the golf course outside and see the golfers come into view, disappear and come back into view, and that's because he had left neglect, so he didn't notice things on his left side visually. But the brain assumed the grass was there, so it includes the grass, but it didn't assume the golfers were there. And some of these brain injuries really show us how we are actually seeing and interpreting the world. So seeing, light, change, looking, time, the transient nature of light as material are things that I've looked at with tests over, always testing in the kiln, wanting to get something into an artwork. And often only when form and the more mundane things of hanging get resolved, then they turn into one. And this piece, the last piece I'll show you, reflected light. I like it because it's an empty frame, because there's nothing in there. But the light around the edges changes in different situations, and it's a call to notice those small changes. There's a lot of work and thought and struggle that goes into my work. And it's very important to be patient and waiting for an idea to be fully formed. But really, with all of that, I aim for my work is not to be thought, but to be about listening. Yeah, my work is just to be felt, not to be thought. And I hope you are able to experience some of this next door. Yes, there is a number of things. Like I say, in terms of like I always have partial ideas of things, and it's to do with like finding a kind of quality I love or an idea, but how that thing comes into an actual object, you know, how it hangs on the wall, or the glass doesn't come that big, or the form is not right, because I'm always searching for qualities. And so, you know, for example, there's a series of work I've wanted to make for quite a while that are half-formed ideas that relate to that piece unseen. I was hoping that I might, you know, present that series at this exhibition, but that wasn't to be the case because all the elements didn't come together to be resolved. And like I kind of said before, in my practice, I've realised it's important to have the confidence to know they will be at some stage. You know, and so there's, amazingly for me, there's a series of works in the exhibition called Near Far. They're kind of blue, that I didn't show them here, but they're bluer works, but they've got powder on them as well. Glass, they're kind of stripy. There's a piece called Resonance that almost looks like material. Like I've got some pieces that are tests like that from before Anna was born, and she's 10. So that just sit there because I didn't really know how to get the colour in the glass that I wanted. And so they just sit there waiting for that subconscious to work, to resolve those ideas from all those inputs that you put into your practice. Yeah, so yes is the answer.